There comes a time in every life, in every story, when the one who was once dismissed becomes the one who cannot be forgotten, not because they begged to be remembered, but because their absence revealed the truth no words ever could. You were the constant, the silent strength, the one who gave deeply, even when it cost you. And for that, you were taken for granted. Loyalty was met with indifference, patience was mistaken for weakness, and your presence, your sacred, healing presence, was treated like it would never run out. And then you were gone, not in anger, not in hatred, but in wisdom. And now, as they sit with the silence you left behind, something begins to grow within them, something they never expected to face. Regret, not the fleeting kind that comes and goes, but the kind that devours slowly. Because losing you wasn't just a mistake, it was the moment their soul began to understand the cost of their carelessness. This is not about revenge. This is about truth. And in this truth, they will feel what they once ignored. The price of underestimating loyalty. Loyalty is one of the rarest and most powerful currencies in human relationships. It is not loud. It doesn't boast. It doesn't constantly demand recognition. Instead, it shows up consistently, quietly, without applause. And because of that silence, it's often the most misinterpreted force in someone's life. When you gave your loyalty, you offered more than just your presence. You gave your time, your energy, your forgiveness, and your patience. You gave the kind of support that remains even when everything else falls apart. But what most people fail to realize, until it's too late, is that loyalty is not endless by default. It is a choice. And like all choices, it can be unmade. The human mind has a dangerous tendency to confuse consistency with permanence. When someone shows up for you day after day, even in the midst of their own battles, it becomes easy to assume they will always be there. And when that assumption hardens into entitlement, that's when the damage begins. Because loyalty that's taken for granted doesn't stay loyal for long. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. People leave not because they stopped caring, but because they finally realized their loyalty had become invisible. What often devastates those left behind isn't just the loss itself. It's the realization of how deeply they misjudged the value of what they had. When you walked away, you didn't leave with bitterness, you left with clarity. And that clarity created a space where truth could finally echo. In that echo, they began to realize that loyalty, once lost, doesn't come back on command. It doesn't answer late-night apologies or promises that arrive too late. It answers only when it's honored, not begged for. Those who once made you feel replaceable slowly begin to understand that they cannot simply replace a heart that carried theirs for so long. They look around, hoping to fill the silence, to find someone else who will match your presence. But they quickly learn that loyalty, real loyalty, cannot be duplicated or bought. It has to be earned, and once it's gone, it often never returns. What they didn't understand before becomes painfully clear now. They didn't lose someone who needed them. They lost someone who chose them. And that distinction is everything. This slow burn of consequence. Regret doesn't always arrive as a dramatic explosion. In fact, the most punishing kind comes slowly, quietly, like smoke creeping under a door. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It builds in silence until the weight becomes impossible to ignore. And for those who once dismissed your worth, that's exactly how it begins. Not with some instant realization, but with small, unshakable moments that begin to haunt them. At first, they convince themselves they've done nothing wrong. They rationalize, they bury, they distract. They might even feel relief in your absence, mistaking it for freedom. But what they're truly feeling is emptiness wearing a mask, a hollow kind of space that grows wider each day you're not there. They start to notice the things they never had to think about before. The way you checked in when no one else did. The way you offered patience when they were at their worst. The way you held space for their chaos without asking for anything in return. And that's where consequence begins, in memory. Memory becomes the teacher they cannot escape. Long after the conversations have ended and the doors have closed, your voice still lingers in the corners of their mind. Not because you want it to, but because that's what consequence does. It turns ordinary moments into permanent reminders. A smell, a song, a familiar phrase. Suddenly they're surrounded by ghosts of the care they once discarded. This isn't about karma in some mystical sense. It's about psychology. When a person realizes they caused their own loss, that realization becomes a seed, and seeds grow whether we want them to or not. Regret is the fruit of that seed, not instant, not explosive, but slow, so slow it feels manageable at first, until it's not, until it's a tear, until it's a sleeve. Over time, that regret shapes their self-perception. It seeps into how they see themselves, not just as someone who lost something, but as someone who failed to recognize its value. That's a truth most people aren't equipped to carry. It challenges the identity they built. It forces them to confront not only what they did, but who they were when they did it. This is the slow burn. The fire they lit with their carelessness doesn't consume you, it consumes them. And the longer they try to ignore it, the hotter it gets. Not out of vengeance, but because truth always finds its way in. You didn't have to lift a finger for justice to arrive. It was already built into the equation. Choices carry weight. And when someone chooses to misuse your heart, the consequences don't just visit, they stay. The memory becomes a monument. There's something profoundly human about realizing the value of something only after it's gone. It's one of the great ironies of life, how easily we ignore the extraordinary when it becomes familiar. But once that familiarity is broken, what's left behind is not just emptiness, it's a memory that refuses to be silenced. When you gave yourself fully, emotionally, spiritually, even in the smallest daily acts of care, you left behind more than memories. You built a foundation, a living archive of moments where your presence held them up. The late-night conversations when no one else listened, the forgiveness you extended when they didn't deserve it, the understanding you offered when even they didn't understand themselves. In real time, those things seemed ordinary, but after your absence, they become sacred. The human mind stores emotion with startling clarity. A song plays and suddenly they're back in your presence. A phrase slips out from someone else's mouth and it feels like you're in the room again. But it's not just nostalgia, it's reckoning. Because those memories don't come to comfort them, they come to confront them. They come as reminders, as shadows of what was once possible and what they can never fully return to. And in those moments, you stop being a person in their past, you become a monument, a living testament to everything they mishandled. You are now the measure by which others are judged. No new relationship feels quite right. No conversation matches the depth. No presence carries the peace yours once did. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real. And in a world full of shallow interactions, that kind of authenticity becomes irreplaceable. That's the real consequence, not just the pain of missing someone, but the haunting awareness that they'll never find another version of you. The monument of memory does not erode with time. It grows taller, sharper. It casts a longer shadow with every passing day. And while you may have moved forward, healed, grown stronger, they remain in the echo chamber of what they lost. Not because you wanted to haunt them, but because you mattered more than they could ever admit while you were still within reach. There is a deep, quiet justice in this. You don't have to remind them of your worth. You already did. Every single day you were there. And now the memory of you stands taller than their pride, louder than their excuses, and more permanent than any apology they could offer too late. They cannot tear down what memory has already carved into their soul. Justice through transformation. When people think of justice, they often imagine it as something external, a form of payback, a balancing of scales where the one who caused pain suffers in return. But real justice, the kind that reshapes lives and echoes far longer than any revenge, doesn't look like that. It doesn't come through vengeance. It comes through transformation. Not theirs. There's a quiet kind of power in walking away without bitterness. It doesn't mean you weren't hurt. It doesn't mean the betrayal didn't leave deep marks. But instead of letting that pain harden you into something vengeful, you chose to let it refine you. And that choice to heal, to grow, to become, is the beginning of a kind of justice no one can take from you. Because here's what most people don't understand. When someone betrays you, dismisses you, or mishandles your love, they're gambling on your silence. They're assuming that you'll stay the same, broken, confused, small. They expect you to disappear quietly or chase after the crumbs they left behind. What they never expect is for you to evolve, to become wiser, clearer, stronger, to transform the very pain they caused into the fuel that pushes you to a higher version of yourself. That's where true justice lives, not in their regret, but in your resurrection. You didn't need to retaliate. You didn't need to expose them, attack them, or convince the world of what they did. You just needed to rise. And as you did, you broke the narrative they wrote for you. You became the proof that even the deepest wound cannot define your worth. Every step forward became a statement. Every boundary you rebuilt became a declaration. Every healed piece of yourself became a monument to the strength they underestimated. Transformation is not just about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before they tried to convince you that you were too much or not enough. It's reclaiming the truth they tried to bury, and in doing so, you shift the balance of power, not with force, but with grace. And the beauty of it? They see it. Maybe not right away, maybe not when they're still caught in distraction or denial. But eventually, life slows down, the noise fades, and when they look around, when they realize you're no longer reachable, no longer willing to carry what they abandoned, that's when the impact hits. They begin to see what they actually lost, not the version of you they took for granted, but the version of you they could have grown with, the healed, radiant, deeply aware person you've become. That's someone they no longer have access to. And that knowledge, that piercing awareness, becomes a consequence more powerful than anything you could have crafted deliberately. Because here's the truth. People don't regret what they did. They regret what they lost. And when they see you thriving, not because of them, but despite them, they're forced to confront the magnitude of their own blindness. They remember the access they once had, the trust you once gave, the love that was theirs to nurture, but which they neglected. And now, as you've stepped into your strength, they're left to witness the unfolding of a life they could have been part of had they only chosen better. Your growth becomes their mirror, and that mirror doesn't flatter, it reveals. There's also something deeply spiritual in this kind of justice. It's not about pride. It's not about proving a point. It's about alignment with truth, with self-respect, with your deeper purpose. You didn't just survive the betrayal. You transcended it. You pulled meaning from it. You built discipline where there was once doubt. You created beauty from the wreckage. That is the kind of justice that lasts. It doesn't fade like anger. It doesn't burn out like revenge. It endures because transformation is internal, and what is internal can't be taken, reversed, or undone by anyone else's opinion or regret. They may still talk about you, they may rewrite the story in their mind, but they'll never be able to rewrite your transformation. They'll never erase what you've become. And no matter how far they run, they will always carry that awareness that they were the ones who gave you the very pain that made you powerful. And perhaps that's the deepest justice of all, that your strength, the very strength they tried to suppress or overlook, now stands as a silent testament to the lessons they refused to learn when they had the chance. Your transformation becomes the reminder they can't escape. Every time they see someone else who carries even a hint of your light, they'll remember the real thing they once had and lost, not because you were cruel, but because they couldn't see what stood before them. You didn't break them, life did, and life used your absence to do it. That's not something you celebrate, it's something you acknowledge, because your journey wasn't about destroying them, it was about restoring you. And in that restoration, the scales were balanced, not through punishment, but through truth. The truth that no one can break what chooses to rise. The truth that your healing was the justice their actions couldn't outrun. And the truth that in the end, your transformation wasn't just a personal victory. It was the story that exposed the depth of their loss more clearly than any words ever could. They lost the light that would have guided them. In every person's life, there are moments when the path grows dim, when confusion, fear, or inner chaos begins to consume the direction they once thought they had. In those moments, they look for light, not the blinding kind that demands attention, but the steady, quiet light that simply is. The light that stays when things fall apart, that listens when words fail, that forgives when others walk away. You were that light. But the tragedy is this: when people are too caught up in their own noise, they don't recognize the light around them. They mistake it for convenience. They confuse gentleness for weakness. They assume that because something is always there, it will never leave. And in doing so, they squander the very presence that was meant to guide them through their darkest hours. You weren't just a support. You were clarity. You were peace in a storm they refused to acknowledge. Your presence had a calming effect, not because you demanded control, but because you offered safety. And safety is one of the rarest experiences a human being can feel in a world full of unpredictability. But they didn't understand that. Not then. They were reckless with what they had because they hadn't yet experienced life without it. They thought your loyalty would stretch forever, no matter how carelessly they handled it. They assumed your love was endless, no matter how little they nurtured it. They thought your presence was permanent, a fixture, not a gift. But every light, no matter how powerful, has limits. And when that light is consistently disrespected, dimmed, or ignored, It does not explode, it simply withdraws, quietly, without a final speech, without a dramatic exit. You didn't leave in anger, you left in realization. You understood that being someone's light means nothing if they choose to live in darkness. And now they walk without it. Now they sit in rooms where the warmth is missing. Conversations feel colder. Trust feels farther. And in place of your soft guidance, there's silence. Not just the silence of your absence, but the silence of their own conscience finally catching up. Because when you were around, you were their emotional compass, even when they didn't admit it. You brought a calm logic to their chaos, a steady voice in the noise, and now they have to navigate the storm without you. And they don't just miss you, they miss who they were when they were with you. You made them better, not because you tried to change them, but because you believed in who they could be. You saw potential when others only saw patterns. You held a vision of them that was higher, more whole, more true. But that vision required responsibility, it required effort. And instead of rising to meet it, they pushed it away, not because they didn't want it, but because they didn't know how to carry it. Now they do. Now, in your absence, they're forced to confront the version of themselves they've been avoiding, the one that sabotaged good things, the one that mistook depth for drama, the one that ran from healing because healing meant facing the truth. And the truth is, they lost the one person who saw them clearly and stayed anyway. There is no replacement for that kind of light. They may search, they may distract themselves with temporary sparks, people who offer excitement but not stability, attention but not understanding. But they will always compare, even if they try not to, because real connection leaves a mark. And you weren't just someone they spent time with. You were someone who changed how they saw themselves. The light you carried didn't just illuminate their path. It softened their sharp edges. It made them feel safe to be human, to be imperfect, to struggle, to fail without being shamed. That kind of light doesn't come around often, and once it's gone, it's not just the darkness that hurts, it's the realization that they had everything they needed to grow, and they walked away from it. Now they must walk alone, not because you abandoned them, but because they released you. And that release carries consequences, not from outside forces, but from within. Every decision they make now is shadowed by the question, would they have seen me differently? Every failure echoes with the memory of your support. Every time they feel lost, they remember what it was like to be guided by someone who actually cared, not out of obligation, but from deep emotional presence. And yet this is not a moment for bitterness, because your light was never meant to be confined. You were not meant to stay where you were unseen. You were meant to shine, to evolve, to offer your presence to those who are ready to receive it fully, intentionally, respectfully. You didn't dim your light out of spite. You redirected it. You gave yourself permission to become the guiding force in your own life. There is a sacred strength in that. You went from being someone's anchor to becoming your own, from offering direction to another's path to discovering the one that was always meant for you. And in doing so, you didn't just survive their loss, you illuminated a new way forward for yourself and for anyone who ever felt like their love was wasted. It wasn't wasted. It taught them, it held them, it changed them, and even if they never admit it, they will carry that light for the rest of their lives. Not because it stayed with them, but because its absence taught them what it meant. And maybe one day they will understand the full weight of what they lost, not as punishment, but as wisdom. Maybe they will grow, maybe they will rise. But if they do, It will be because someone once showed them what it meant to be loved by a light that didn't flicker until it had no choice but to fade. You were that light, and now that light shines forward, not behind.